Hi, this is Father Bill W. here in Austin, Texas. I want to give you a warm welcome to the podcast. If you are new to these podcast series, what we try to do here is go a little bit deeper into the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, especially exploring some of the unique Oxford group spirituality out of which our program emerged. And one of those lost pieces was a practice that they called two-way prayer. If you haven't done so already, I'd strongly encourage you to go to our website and take a look at some of the information we have there. It'll teach you how to do the practice. And I'm also pleased to announce that last week we got word from a new journal. It's called Substance Abuse Journal. Actually, not new, it's been around for 40 years or so. But they've accepted for publication a recent study that we did on the effectiveness of two-way prayer. We had done a previous study that was published in Alcoholism Quarterly, and that one's on our website. You can go and see that under articles. But the new one was really much more in-depth. It was done as a doctoral dissertation by a woman at the University of Texas. And we interviewed and trained some 200 people in the practice of two-way prayer. We pre-tested them and post-tested them, had a blind study to see how those would do who did the two-way prayer practice compared to those who were not given the opportunity to do it. Ethically, then we went back and showed those people how to do it as well. So it's really a tremendous honor to have been accepted for that. And I think it's really important to teach people the practice because it was just so instrumental in the early days of AA and the Oxford group. It was the major vehicle for bringing about the transformation, the psychic change. And that psychic change, of course, is what really is at the heart of the transformation process. So we're up to episode 5 now in this series focused on psychic change. And this subject is important because really, if you get down to it, all of AA's 12 steps are really built around producing this psychic change in someone who will take them and do them seriously. Dr. Silkworth, in the Doctor's Opinion in the Big Book, states that the chronic alcoholic must experience an entire psychic change if he has any hope of overcoming his alcoholism. And he goes on to say that something more than human power is needed to produce this essential psychic change. So it's a spiritual journey whereby we come into conscious contact with this spirit that is able to transform us at the very deepest levels of self. And that is the journey on which Dr. Carl Jung sent Roland Hazard initially to find this psychic change, because typical psychiatry wasn't going to be able to affect it in him. But placing himself in a religious environment and hoping for the best, in effect, that's really what was at the root of the beginnings of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we've been trying to define this psychic change thing, look at it from different angles. And of course, what we learned is that psychic change comes in 2 varieties. And one is the sudden type, the dramatic type that Bill Wilson experienced there in Towns Hospital. And the other is more of the gradual type, the educational variety. That was the term used by William James. And it was the kind that Dr. Bob experienced. Bob didn't have a dramatic psychic change, but he did have a gradual one, and one might argue an even more effective one in more areas of his life than Bill had experienced. Bill would always say that Bob was by far the more spiritual of the two. So whether yours has been dramatic or slow grinding, doesn't really matter. It's going to, in the end, bring us to the very same place. And so now in this episode, what I want to explore is the question, does the change last? Uh, and so we're going to return to the book by Dr. William Miller. He titled it Quantum Change. And we talked about this before. What Miller did is probably the most in-depth exploration of this subject since William James did it in 1902. That's a long time. But he interviewed 100 155 people, I think it was, in New Mexico, advertised in the newspaper. Have you had one of these psychic changes? And if you had, get in touch with us. And hundreds of people did. And he and his team interviewed them at some length, looking at what kind of changes were they. And for this episode, he really tried to answer the question, were they effective enough to last over a prolonged period of time? Of course, some of the people were alcoholics in his study, and some were not. So some 10 years later, he went back and he re-interviewed a number of these people. And here were some of the areas wherein he saw the changes happening. So the first one was in the area of their emotions. Then he says the changes often involved release from long-standing patterns of negative emotions. That this thing shakes us up, and if it does it at really deep levels, you're going to see profound changes in emotions that had been kind of the way we've been through all of our lives up until this point, and then something begins to shift. So here's an interview that he did with a woman who had suffered incest at the hands of her father, and I'm sad to say that's just all too common in recovery circles today. People, particularly women, but a number of young men too, who have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of people who shouldn't be doing that kind of thing to them. So here's this woman. See if maybe somebody out there can identify. Here's what she said. This is after her change. 10 years later. She says, I'm not afraid anymore. I don't think of myself as ugly or dirty. My outlook on men has changed. I've learned that everyone has good in them. I can even understand my father. I don't hate him. I still think he's sick and warped, but I don't hate him. I understand that he's a sick person. Before I felt that he was evil, that he should be put to death, tortured, mutilated. Now that's all gone. I'm at peace. Miller reports on others who overcame serious, deep depression that had troubled them all of their lives and lifelong fears that began then to go away once this connection to something very deep and different started happening. He observes it wasn't merely a matter of such negative feelings being removed. Rather, it was clear from people's accounts that they had been replaced by an enduring sense of calm, peacefulness, hope, security, and inner strength. Well, there's the psychic change, shifting from one way of being in the world to another. It's not just removing what's wrong in our old consciousness. It's the excitement and the new life that comes when our consciousness is actually replaced. It's like we get a chance to live two lives. Second area of change that Miller noted was in people's priorities. He said the things that people valued changed. Many of their value systems, he said, were actually turned almost upside down. And so he lists quite a number of them that he studied, but here are the top 4 changes. And he did it by sex. He did it by the ones that changed in men, and then the changes that he noted in women. And the top 4 in men used to be, these are their values, that they used to be focused on wealth, attaining wealth. adventure, a sense of achievement, and pleasure. So those were the top four. And after the change, after a 10-year period, same people, but their top four priorities were now what? Spirituality, personal peace, family, and the fourth one, doing God's will. Doing God's will. That became one of the real top priorities in their lives. And for women, in his study, the four that preceded it were family. They were focused on family. They were focused on independence, focused on career, and fitting in. Those were the top four priorities. In some ways, of course, the women were quite a bit more advanced than we men. But in the end, they changed too. And they changed to what? To growth. That growth became the most important, dominant priority in their life. Self-esteem, feeling good about themselves. And that was in the study, that was one of the things that we saw, a tremendous shift in individuals in our two-way prayer study, that self-esteem really shifted amongst those who listened to God and the ones who just did traditional prayer and meditation. Spirituality became one of the top four, and joy, a sense of joy. They could enter that space and feel that space, and they wanted more of it. The third area of change was in people's behaviors. Changed people started taking better care of themselves. They started to develop more stable lifestyles, drove their cars more patiently, he said, and they took time out of their day to enjoy some of the simpler pleasures. Many of the people became active in church. Others did not do so, but they tended to grow in their own spirituality, their connectedness to life, to God, to the environment, to the people around them. So those were the behavioral changes. The fourth was in the area of their relationships. That those who'd undergone a psychic change, they tended to grow in compassion and trust. Compassion, to feel with, to have compassion for people who are also suffering. It opened them up to that rather than being closed off. They were able to be there for people. They were able to trust more. They didn't have the answers, didn't know what was coming any more than anybody else in this life, but they trusted life more, that it was going to unfold and they were going to be all right. They showed a desire for deeper relationships, and they also showed an impatience with superficial ones. They didn't want to waste their time just staying on the surface of things. They had a desire to find people who had gone deep and learn from them and be with them. Family relationships improved. And often long-standing issues within the family, particularly the family of origin, were resolved. And they noted an emotional detachment from those families, particularly if they stayed sick. And that allowed them to grow healthier dynamics within their own families. I remember going home in early recovery. I think I was a year, maybe two, in AA, and I went back to New York to visit the family at Christmas. And the first thing, you get kind of that euphoric recall. I'm going to go home, and everybody's going to be happy to see me, and all this good stuff. And you're sober, and isn't that wonderful? And boy, that wasn't what I found. What I found is I was going right back into a very sick family system that had not changed. I had changed, but they had not changed. And there was drinking and there was drug use going on, and there was a pull that I felt. Come on back into this system. What do you think? You're better than we are? You pulled out, and they didn't like that. And I'll never forget that one night. I didn't stay as long as I thought I was going to stay, but one night I just had to get myself to a meeting, and I got on the phone and found a meeting and went there, and I felt home. It was the most amazing experience. Here I was going home, and home was no longer home. And I went to an AA meeting with a bunch of people who didn't really know me, and I felt home. I mean, there's the shift that was happening, that I'm connecting at a deeper level with strangers than I am with people, who I've known all of my life. The fifth area of growth was in the area of spirituality. And we'll come back to this one because I think it's probably the most important, and it's one where I think alcoholics and addicts can maybe even teach Miller a thing or two about this subject. And the final thing that Miller noted in his study post 10 years was that the changes people experienced tended to be consolidated over time. They grew deeper. He writes, many of the storytellers emphasized that their experience was not just an event, but the beginning of an ongoing process. Um, the change is ongoing. Even a decade later, it's still unfolding. And I think that's the sign of a genuine spiritual experience. I mean, you can have these hot flashes, these white light epiphanies, and Miller said some of the people who had these still did not change. It was not a guarantee, but the ones who had it and it got their attention, or the ones who came at it and grew more slowly, those were the ones in whom the changes were more lasting. And I said I was going to return to the spiritual transformation that people undergo following a psychic change. And I wanted to hold off because these changes are actually reported in the big book, and they come to us as a set of promises, but they're really the reports, the experiences of the first 100 people in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. So we'll take a short look at these. You know them, many of you probably know them better than I do. So what are they? Well, the first 100 report feeling a new freedom and a new happiness. I wish to God Wilson's story about his feeling of being locked, chained inside a deep cave had made it into the big book. It's one of the best stories he told. And what he said was, and I've said this before, but he felt like he was chained. His alcoholism had him chained to the back of a wall, and he could see his family outside calling to him, "Come out, Bill! Come out! We're here for you!" And he couldn't get out. Didn't know how to do it. And then Ebby Thatcher, who had been chained in his own cave, walks in and shows him the way out, a new freedom. I don't think we can experience a new freedom unless we've already felt chained and locked and lost. People, first 100, didn't regret the past. They didn't want to shut the door on it. Matter of fact, the past was the key to the future because they had to remember that past. They had to benefit from that past. If they didn't do that, then it served no purpose. And the book says, Wilson says, sometimes the past is our only asset. Lost the money, lost the job, lost the family, but we got our past. And we don't regret it because it's there to teach us if we can learn from it, if we can tap into it. It's got tremendous power. It's one of the reasons for going to meetings. It's one of the reasons for working with other alcoholics, that we can see where we came from. They were coming to know serenity and peace. They saw how their experience could actually benefit others. Each one of us has his own story. And I really believe that there's another human being out there for whom your story is the perfect story that they need to hear. Some of us aren't so proud of our stories, that they're not as dramatic. We're not like the circuit speakers. Well, it's probably a good thing. I don't know how healthy a lot of that stuff is. But there's some individual who, if you can tell it and not doctor it up or anything, just tell it like it felt from the inside out, then you're going to touch somebody, and that's a real gift that you've got, that you can do something that nobody else can really do. Uselessness, self-pity were being replaced by meaning and purpose. There's a book called Man's Search for Meaning. I probably read it 10 times in my early sobriety. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist, Jewish psychiatrist in a prison camp. He found meaning and purpose in a prison camp, in a Nazi prison camp, sentenced to death. He found meaning and purpose to his life. And what he writes in there, he says, you can go without water for a while, you can go without food for a while, but you cannot go without meaning and purpose. And he said he would see it in the eyes of the prisoners, his fellow prisoners. Once they lost that meaning and purpose, he knew their days were numbered, that they were going to give up the faith, give up the trust, give up the life. And so finding that meaning and purpose is so tremendously important in this recovery process. They began to lose interest in selfish things, replaced by what? Interest in others. There's the shift. It's shifting from a self-centeredness to an other-centeredness. That's profound. That's huge. That's a great distance we have to travel. Self-seeking slipped away. Why? Because it gets replaced by God-seeking. What is His will for me? It's no longer what can I get out of life, but what is it that I can possibly contribute to it? I remember getting called down by a sponsor early in recovery. I went to a meeting, and I got to admit, it was not the whippiest meeting in the world. It was kind of dull and boring and all that sort of stuff. And I went back to him, and he said, "Well, how was the meeting, Bill?" And I said, "Dude, it was a lousy meeting. It was a lousy meeting." And he asked me, "What did you contribute to it?" Really stunned me. See, my old consciousness was to be the judge of others in those meetings. Did you entertain me? Was it a good meeting? And the furthest thing from my mind at that point was, what was it that I could contribute? My little psychic change shifted a few inches as a result of that conversation. Fear of people, financial insecurity will begin to leave us. I wound up in the Salvation Army in downtown Detroit. That's where I started off my recovery, lived there for 6 months, and then an AA halfway house. I got to say, some of the happiest days of my life. Why? Because I was living day to day. I didn't know where the next dime was going to come from. Every meal was kind of a gift. I had nothing. And when you have nothing, then even the smallest of things, you can be so grateful for them. Whereas if you've got tons and tons of things, you look at them and say, could be more, could be better, So this simplicity is so important for this psychic change to really hold sway with us. And finally, what the book says, again, these people's experience was that they began to realize that God was doing for them what they couldn't do for themselves. And to me, that is the essence of the psychic change, that it puts us into a new relationship with our Creator, one of reliance instead of defiance, one of what is your will for me today? Not as what my will, here's what my will is, now you come and help me. No, what is your will for me today? And of course, one of the things that any study of AA is going to be quick to reveal is that people went through this process before we had the steps, and even after we had the steps. They went through it very, very quickly. so that they could get to the other side, that they could get to the land of the psychic change. Some people are going to take you a year to get through the steps. Well, that's crazy. People will be dead by the time a year's over. They need to get to 10, 11, and 12, where on a daily basis, they're watching themselves and seeing where they're drifting away from God, and asking God for that help, for that guidance, for that intuitive thought. That's the vital part of the recovery program. So my old sponsor, used to tell me something, and I really liked it. He said, we really have a leg up on these earth people. And some of the people that Miller was studying, kind of the earth people, they weren't the alcoholics and addicts. Maybe half were. But alcoholics and addicts, when it comes to spirituality, we really do have a leg up. We have a gift. And the gift is our past. The gift is the near-death experience that many of us went through. It's the guilt, the shame, the pain, the remorse, all of that stuff that is in our old psychic world versus the advent of this new world. And I really believe if I can stay focused in on that recovery is an ongoing spiritual journey. It's an uncovering and a discovering of a new and a different world. It's not just going to meetings. And this was the trap that I got myself into at 20 years sober. Was I thought, well, another round of 90 meetings in 90 days. Well, I wasn't really going to do it. Or another round through the 12 steps, the way I've been working them. Wasn't going to do it. What was going to do it? What was going to do it was refocusing on this psychic change, on developing a really intimate relationship with the God of my understanding, or non-understanding in my case, and allow that energy to come into my life and change me. And nothing has done that more for me than this process of two-way prayer. Because in the beginning, that was the thing the early AAs believed was going to change them. It was the prayer and the meditation, not the going to meetings. So I think we've made a shift in that regard, and we need to get back to learning what this process was that the old timers had. And I know the hundreds and hundreds of people that I see doing it are seeing just tremendous changes in their lives. So I want to thank you for listening. If you've got some experiences with your own psychic changes that you'd like to share with us, please send me a note. You can write me at twowayprayer@gmail.com. Love to hear from you. Love to share some of them with our listeners. So thanks so much for listening. God bless, and keep coming back.